It's been said that life in the 50s was simple and orderly. Society was the pillar of society. Teachers, police officers, and politicians were all well respected, and their claims pretty much went unchallenged. Or at least for the most part, they did. But not for one love-struck teenage couple who unfortunately met with foul play one balmy autumn night in 1953 while out on what would have been a very romantic and intimate date. What actually went down that night stretched into one of my city's oldest unsolved mysteries, and absolutely one of the most vicious assaults, most horrendous attacks ever inflicted upon a child. Hey everybody, welcome to my channel and to an episode of Missing Kids. Marion Joan McDowell has been missing since December the 6th, 1953, from Scarborough, Ontario, Canada, for 71 years now, and her remains have never been found. Okay, guys, let's get into this. So, Marion was actually born in November of 1936, which made her a teenager at the time that this event took place. So, she was a bit of a tomboy, very boisterous, and an utter social butterfly. And I imagine, had she lived in these days, she would have breathed every living moment on Instagram. Her hobbies included tennis, swimming, roller skating, pinball playing, and music, of course. In the past, Marion had worked in a department store and a bank, and had been an invoice typist for a printing firm as well. But when this story takes place, she was actually a stenographer, just like Eileen. Remember her? Picture this scenario. It was on a Sunday, December the 6th, 1953, and actually Marion was on cloud nine. At 7 in the evening, in this part of the world, it would have been dark. Dark at around 5 p.m. So, at 5'3" and 130 pounds, Marion was a Caucasian, blue-eyed, and brown-faced blonde. And that night, as she got ready for her date, her mood would have been idyllic. And why would she have been so happy? Well, she was going out with her new boyfriend, a handsome Jim Wilson. And he was a good catch to boot, as he was a scaffolder for a major city company. So she knew that she was pretty lucky. Caught some glimpses of Jim in old newspaper clippings, and yeah, he was pretty handsome. So early that evening, around 7 p.m., the attractive Jim Wilson, who was only 19 years old at the time, drove up to the home, the family home, to pick up his date, Marion McDowell, from her Oak Park Avenue East York home, where she lived with her parents, Florence and Ross, and her brother, Ross Jr. And as Marion happily waved to her family from the front door as she went out, little did anyone ever know that it would be the last time the family would ever see Marion alive again. The pair drove Jim's 1942 5-passenger Plymouth coupe a few miles within Scarborough. And so Marion was then 17 years old and a beautiful young lady. And for the date, she wore a blue coat, a white blouse, a black pleated wool skirt, black ballerina slippers or shoes, and a silver chain with a heart around her wrist, and a ring on her left hand with the initials MM, which of course would have stood for Marion McDowell. And so on that note, I would have to safely assume that they were not yet engaged, as it was only their fourth date. The couple pulled into a quiet road in a park that I assume to be near Lookout Point in the Victoria Park and King Road area known as the Scarborough Bluffs. I cannot I cannot skip over this without first impressing upon you the historical significance of this very enchanting region of my city. And it's like a lover's paradise. And it's also pretty much, I think, in my own way, I think it's very much a key to what really actually went down with this couple on that evening in 1953. And it's the key to the mystery that we don't know. I really believe that this location is pivotal to everything that transpired to Jim and Marion that night. I really tried to get to the Scarborough Bluffs today, and even though I have a pretty good idea of where it is, I don't see any way at all humanly possible in this kind of traffic to get there and take footage of it. It is indeed very beautiful, although assumed to be in a state of neglect at the moment, some parts of it. The Scarborough Bluffs is a beautiful region of, like kind of cliffs and escarpments, and it is actually a big group of wonderfully arranged parks, and I'm trying to remember exactly how beautiful it was in my memories when I was there as a young girl. And I know that when I got there, I wasn't prepared for the natural beauty. I was, just taken aback. It was so romantic, guys. And a good many people booked weddings and parties at the Guild Inn, where beautiful events were held. And so just let me quickly explain briefly the history of the Scarborough Bluffs Guild Inn. And in 1914, the property was known as Ranelagh Park, owned by Colonel Harold Bickford. And so Bickford built Bickford House, which would probably be this Guild Inn, which was a 33-room arts and crafts style manor house on the property. And it was just a summer house. And so a little later on in 1921, the property was sold to the Roman Catholic Church's Foreign Mission Society and renamed the China Mission College. And so in 1923, it was purchased again by Richard Veitch. And Richard Veitch Look, who lived with the family at the mansion until 1927. Incidentally, the Sisters of St. Joseph did own land on the Bluffs one time. And so, some of you might remember my tour of my old private high school. Well, that was owned and run by the same Sisters of St. Joseph nuns. From 1927 to 1932, the property was vacant. And so in 1932, it was purchased by Rosa Houston. And in August of that same year, she married Herbert Spencer Clark in a ceremony on that estate. And so they started that honeymooners tradition at the Guild Inn. And so for a honeymoon, they chose to go on a motor trip to the USA to visit similar organizations in which they were keenly interested. And so, yeah, they were very closely tied to businesses in the United States. This couple were directors of the Robert Owen Foundation, which was founded that year, and it was an organization that supported the development of cooperative organizations and named after the utopian socialist Robert Owen. And so the couple resided in the mansion and fostered the arts guys. So it was a cultural center. And they turned the property into an artist's colony, modeled after Roycroft in East Aurora, New York, a center of the arts and crafts movement. And so by the time of the Second World War, this mansion became the Guild of All Arts. Now, the Clarks built more additional homes and workshops for artists all across their property. And so some examples would be the studio, which was assembled out of a garage and a stable from various parts of the grounds. And it accommodated those people who practiced woodworking, batik, weaving, metalworking. So it really was an honest-to-goodness guild. More interestingly, the Clarks also collected architectural pieces, elements from other famous demolished buildings in my city, such as the Canada Bank, I think it was Canada Bank, and the Toronto Star, the old Toronto Star building. And so they erected these artifacts right within the gardens of the Guild. And so that particular area of the garden was the most perfect and beautiful, amazing backdrop for weddings and other such events. There are a few cabins, 1800s log cabins, and right on the property. And one of the oldest ones, although the date is not for sure, is known as the Osterhout log cabin. And so the grounds nowadays are abandoned, and the actual guild closed down, and I believe it was 2001. And so the city of Toronto purchased that property, and now it's sort of been kind of neglected. And although the gardens are very well maintained, it's essentially closed. But there are other, something like 11 or 12 other parks within the Scarborough Bluffs that people continue to visit on a daily basis. Where I was headed to today, but I wanted to show you so badly, but no such luck yet. Maybe by the time I post the video, I will have found a way to incorporate some clips into my vlog. Meantime, let's get back to the story. So driving away from the home and into another part of Scarborough, they pulled into a quiet road, and so they stayed there, guys, for about 90 minutes. So it was probably 8:30 when something happened. Suddenly, in the darkness, a car pulled up alongside the couple, Marion and Jim, as they sat in a car. And it was indeed a very romantic and quiet evening. And so it startled them. And so what happened was that this man I'm assuming it was a man and not a woman. I'm not sure. Um, the voice was definitely masculine. Nobody was ever able to identify the male because he approached the car. He approached Jim's car with a woolen cap or a woolen hoodie that was covering his entire face. And he went alongside the passenger side of the door and he threatened them. He threatened Jim and said, hand over your wallet. This is a stick-up. And he did brandish a gun. Nothing at this point had yet happened to Marion. What happened was after Jim handed the criminal his wallet, which had $10 in it, and at that time, $10 was an enormous amount of money. The criminal took the money, took the wallet, and he asked Jim to turn around. And at that point, the criminal pistol whipped him. He hit Jim right on the head very hard with the butt end of the pistol. And so later on, that would require 17 stitches to patch up. But it's ironical that it requires 17 stitches because that is exactly one for every year of Marion's life, Marion's very young life, which was cut so short that evening. Or so we may assume. Articles describe this event as a carjacking, although the car itself was found later not too far away from the area where Jim and Marion had been parked, and Jim was still in the car. And the car was actually abandoned in the lot. So, yeah, that's weird. The car was not actually stolen, but Marion was. Later on, when Jim tried to report all of this to the police, it was difficult because he remembered fading in and out of consciousness several times, and he had just the vaguest bits of memory. And so one memory was of the back of the coupe with Marion's body sprawled across him. And so probably at that point, she was either seriously injured or maybe just knocked out. We don't know at what point the murderer actually did his worst. So a lot of this is guesswork. The next memory Jim had was of being in a car lot behind another car. And that's what I neglected to tell you just previously, that After the criminal pulled up alongside Jim's car, another car also arrived and pulled up close by. So there were two cars involved in this carjacking. What Jim actually did see next, and in his next little bit of memory, was that he saw someone else other than the criminal, I think, or maybe without the hoodie. He saw someone close the trunk of the other car and then get into the driver's seat of that other car and drive away. And so actually what he didn't manage to see, because the hood of the trunk was up, right, was Marion's lifeless body, bleeding body, being stuffed into the trunk. After the other vehicle drove out of the lot, Jim managed to, he was conscious by then, but kind of, groggy in and out of it, and in a lot of pain. And so actually he didn't immediately go to the police. He was so much in shock and so stunned and in such pain that he first went home to tell his father, Archie Wilson, exactly what happened. And Archie then convinced Jim, his son, to, be a man and go to the police. And I guess Jim was so scared and frightened. And can you imagine how he must have felt? And I'm imagining that Jim is telling the full story here. I'm imagining that he would have nothing to hide. Now, remember, there may have been other reasons why Jim wanted to go to the Scarborough Bluffs that evening. Maybe the way that I see things is that there were stairs that were being built on the Scarborough Bluffs. They had already been built in 1919. And so what I imagine is that in their state of deterioration, maybe Jim's company was, in the process of trying to replace a few of those stairs. I don't know. But it seems to be more of a professional interest. Maybe his interest was also, linked to his job. And so I'm not sure. I'm trying to, find something else here, because nobody has ever been able to come up with any valid theories. And so I don't even know if there are any valid theories. So anyway, after going home to talk to his father, Jim then headed down to the police station to file a report. Later on, several clues were found in that yard that was just a short distance from where Jim and Marion had been parked. And it was a fenced-in, vacant lot. And so found in that lot on the ground was Jim's discarded wallet and, of all things, a bar of old-fashioned Sunlight brand laundry soap, which was still in the box, but with the wrapper around it missing. And so I'm not familiar with that kind of soap at all. And so, yeah, weird. We don't know if that bar of soap was related to the crime or was just a random item that had been there forever. You know what I mean? And so the lot's gate actually and chain had actually both been broken. And so, yeah, it seemed like people had trespassed in order to use that area to further commit the crime that had been carried out that night. By that, I mean that probably whatever happened to Marion, she was probably finished off, sadly, right then and there in the lot. She may have been alive or semi-conscious when they drove the car through, and then after they took her, I don't even want to get into that. I'm just going to leave the rest up to your imaginations. But it was not a good sight. It was not a good situation for anybody. And I can't imagine how scared those kids must have been. They were only 17 and 19 years old. Yeah, children. And I don't mean that in a derogatory, way. I'm using it in a legal term, as a legal term. They were children. They were minors. Jim's 1942 Plymouth also contained Marion's black purse and her headscarf. Now, the headscarf and actually another clue are very key they tell us exactly what happened to Marion. Not where she is, but what happened to her. And the headscarf had 2 cuts in it. It had been folded as she wore it on her head, and it had 2 cuts in it and in the fabric. And also in the fabric was blood. So that scarf told the police that she sustained at least 2 heavy blows to the head, and maybe more if the 3rd or 4th one didn't get through the scarf. You know what I'm saying? And so 2 different types of blood were found inside the car. And so that would have been type A, Marion's, and type O, Jim's. And we knew from further research that Jim's type was O. So the other blood must have been type A, Marion's. Jim lost a pint of blood. And guys, in the back seat, what was found was so much blood. Not Jim's. Yeah, some of it was Jim's, but so much blood that there is no way that Marion could have ever sustained an injury to that degree of gravity and survived. She's gone, guys. And so let's talk a little bit about the search. The search, Marion's father, Ross, who happened to be a foreman in a lingerie factory, stayed out all night and the next morning searching. And in the days to come, volunteers dragged ponds, looked down wells, and flew over forests and farmland that surrounded the crime scene. And so the search extended to cottage country, which I'm familiar with, Lake Simcoe, which is quite far out in the way opposite end of the city. And it takes a couple of hours to get there. And it's quite remote, especially in the wintertime, guys. Nobody goes there in the winter. Unless you actually live there. Nobody's there in the winter. And so, with the thought, the search did extend to that part of the city. And with the thought that the kidnapper and murderer may have hidden there in a summer home. And it's very likely that he might have done something similar, but not in that area. You know what I'm saying? And so 2,000 men and soldiers combed Scarborough on Saturday, December the 12th, and ham radio operations set up a network of stations to report any news to a central location located on King Street. And I know that that would be very close to the Scarborough Bluffs, where I was trying to head to today and couldn't because of all the traffic and me not knowing exactly where I was going and whatever have you. So, Jim was very obviously, as always, he was a suspect and remained so until January of the following year, until he actually got to Buffalo, New York with a detective to take a lie detector test. And because here in Canada, they were at the time illegal. And so, but it is very much certain that he wanted to clear his name. And, he must have been so passionate about Marion because they were, getting to know each other. They were on their fourth date. It's very likely that they even spoke of maybe marrying or getting engaged. Things were going well for them. They both worked. And so he must have been quite attached to her. The real suspect who held them up was described as about 5'8" with a narrow face, and he wore a dark woolen hoodie and mask, branding a pistol, a Walther 38, or a Luger. And so, yeah, that's about all we have on him. But we have to wonder if such an angry crime could have been linked to maybe one of Marion's past romantic ties. I don't know. I don't know anything else about Marion except that she was a social butterfly. I imagine she was a very well brought up young lady. She wasn't in school, so maybe, I don't know. I don't want to theorize about what kind of a girl she was, but I'm sure that she was quite likable and quite mature and quite surprised at the attack that was thrust upon her that night. Then Scarborough was merely a suburb. It is still basically a suburb, but it was remote, guys. It was very far out from the urban center where I grew up. And so that township police department began a barn-by-barn, quote-unquote, search of the area northeast of the field where Marion McDowell was abducted. And they also were acting on an anonymous telephone tip that her body would be in one of those barns. However, the tipster, who may have been up to no good, or may have been merely a witness who might have seen something, I don't know. The tipster did not specifically locate the actual barn. And so he actually did claim it was 13 miles, specifically north and east of where the teen stenographer was abducted Sunday night by the hooded gunman. And so every other clue has been checked out, except for the latest tip. Everything else that Jim said and described was factual. And he would have had no reason to lie, guys. Unless he was involved, the police would have probably caught him in a lie. That never happened. There was nothing there. And I know that we can come up with a lot of theories, but we're not going to do that because that's not usually how we solve cases. Sometimes it makes a mess. So, this is really such a horrific and horrendous mystery. What a crime. So, we are as far from solving this horrific crime and opening up this incredulous mystery as we were the night that James Wilson walked into the police station to claim that he was beaten unconscious and his girlfriend, Marion, had been abducted. We're no closer to the truth than we were then. Despite a reward of $2,000 being offered for any information leading to the discovery of Marion or her remains, nobody has ever come forward because nobody saw anything. It was pretty remote up there. I can guarantee you, fact number one, the Scarborough Bluffs area, especially at night, is not a bustling area. Probably not even now. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to go check it out again. The first time that I ever went there was with my first boyfriend. And I remember we had just started back at university. It was fall. It was autumn, my favorite time of year. And we had just gotten back together in July, the previous July, after having been apart for about 7 or 8 months. And so it was a happy reunion. It was a reunion that kept going on and on and on. And he was so gentlemanly and romantic to me in those days, trying to make it up to me. And I remember being absolutely floored by the beauty of the Guild Inn. And I poked around in there, and it was such a beautiful old place. And it breaks my heart to realize that it's not in operation anymore. In other words, I can't go in and visit. I imagine it's still intact, but the memories that place brings me, the beauty of the nature around it, it's so breathtaking, guys. And I know that there were films filmed there. I know that there was a film with Christopher Reeves that had just been released, and I loved Christopher Reeves. I still do. And I really admired Christopher Reeves, even after everything that he went through in his life. And I remember being on the staircase of the Guild Inn, and right in the same spot where Christopher Reeves had stood in the movie. And I was just captivated and enthralled. And my boyfriend really knew what would, excite me and please me. He was a good friend. And so, guys, that's about all I have for you today. I'm going to still work on trying to get those clips for you, but don't get your hopes up. I don't think that I'm going to manage to get there at all. It's quite a ways out for me, and even if I took public transit, it would be even worse to get there. So, I'm not going to do it. And thank you very much for listening and watching. I hope that if you were in the area of the Scarborough Bluffs in 1953, before I came along, I would, if you can jog your memory, if you remember anything of December the 6th, 1953, please be in touch with authorities. Thank you very much for listening and watching. I hope you liked it. Bye!